Hello and welcome to a biometric update webinar. Today, we'll be discussing the battle of the bots, countering AI attacks with identity proofing. We are very fortunate today to have Blair Cohen of Authentic ID with us and Benji Hutchinson from Rank 1 Computing. I'll be going to each of them soon, and we'll be discussing this hot topic in the field of digital identity and biometrics. I am Chris Burt. I am the managing editor of Biometric Update, and I'll be your host for today. I'll be asking questions of Blair and Benji and leading the conversation, but I would also like to invite all of you to participate as well. Hope that you're all familiar by now with the question and answer function of Zoom. If not, you'll find the button at the bottom of your screen there. Just click on it and type in your question, and we will get to as many of those questions as we can at the end of our discussion. So you may find that you have questions that get answered in the course of our discussion. I would encourage you to go ahead and fire away and ask them anyways, and feel free to ask follow-ups and so on. We'll see how much we have time for today. We are in an era of rapidly evolving technology where the techniques of malicious actors are changing quickly. The rise of AI-powered identity fraud and cyber attacks has brought a new level of sophistication to online attacks. As the threats become increasingly complex, traditional security measures are struggling to keep up, and this is leaving individuals and organizations vulnerable. So we're going to delve into the emergence of AI-powered threats and what it means, the technology arms race, next generation identity verification, and best practices for implementation. So with that, I would like to bring in Blair to set up this problem for us and where he comes at it and what Authentic ID does. Hello, Blair.
Awesome.
How are you today?
Awesome, Chris. It's a beautiful day here in Atlanta. Hope you're having a good day where you are as well, and that everybody else is. Thank you for being here today. Very grateful. My name is Blair Cohen. I'm the founder and president at Authentic ID. And Authentic ID is an enterprise class global identity proofing, next generation identity proofing and authentication company. We use methods that are much more difficult for counterfeiters to utilize to commit fraud. So traditionally, identity's been proving with asserted data. Chris would assert his name, address, date of birth, social security number, things like that. But no longer is data the right way to prove identity. We use things that are difficult and are considered the gold standard for proving identity across the globe. So something you have instead of something you know, your government issued identity document. And we use very powerful AI to analyze those identity documents in a fully automated way to make sure to determine whether they're authentic or counterfeit or some sort of iteration or tampered with document. And then we combine one other modality, and that's using biometrics. So again, really hard to steal your face, especially using the latest AI technologies with liveness. So we combine the authenticity of the identity document with the liveness of the person at the end of the transaction, make sure that they're the one depicted on the ID, produce a decision in a very quick period of time, typically 6-7 seconds.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Blair. And we'll be getting into some of the details on several of those topics over the next few minutes. But at this point, I'd like to bring in Benji to tell us a little bit more about Rank 1 Computing and his perspective on this issue. How are you doing today, Benji?
Good. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me, and thanks to Blair. It's good to be with you all here today. As Chris mentioned, I'm Benji Hutchinson. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of Rank 1 Computing. As you all may know, Rank 1 Computing is an identity and computer vision technology company. We don't build hardware solutions. We don't provide services. We are strictly in the algorithm and software business. And so we are proud that we provide face, iris, fingerprint, object, text, and liveness technologies for about 7 years. And as you can see, we've got a number of customers all around the world. And we deal with a lot of the same problems that Blair highlighted, whether it be biometric security in cyberspace or working through countering fraud use cases with a bunch of our customers. We primarily work in the commercial sector and the public sector space, so both of those sectors. We are an American company. We've got a headquarters in Denver, but we've also got an office in West Virginia, and all of our operations are here in the United States. And obviously, as we'll get into, we're very proud that we've got a number of our technologies that have been tested and ranked by NIST and also iBeta certified. And we'll talk a little bit about how those technologies play into these use cases and these challenges that we've been facing. And the other thing that I'll tease and we'll get into, no doubt, which is liveness detection. As we've been talking about face recognition in cyberspace and biometrics and how that technology works, liveness adds that second layer of reliability and detection to stop some of these technologies or these fraud efforts that are going on in cyberspace. And so we'll get into some of that as we go forward. Thanks, and it's good to be here.
Thank you, Benji. And yeah, I just want to move along to the next slide here, just give people a little bit of background information as we discuss. It's clear to see there's a major increase happening in sophisticated fraud attacks. So I wanted to ask each of you, and Blair, I'll start with you. What are the AI-based fraud attacks that you're observing, and particularly the ones that are increasing either in frequency or in the risk that they present?
Terrific question, Chris. We have seen a dramatic uptick in the use of generative techniques to create totally synthetic data. So we see synthetic headshots, we see synthetic text, synthetic backgrounds, synthetic signatures, total IDs that are completely synthetic. So we've seen a really huge rise in the use of these generative techniques to attack enterprises throughout the globe. It's not just here in the US. Pretty much everybody that we have production instances, we're seeing these generative techniques being applied.
And how does that line up, Benji, with what you're observing in the field?
Yeah, no, I mean, Blair is spot on. We've seen an uptick in how artificial intelligence and machine learning is used to both train and field new types of technologies that can be used for all sorts of different good use cases and bad use cases, right? So, I mean, everybody is talking about facial recognition for the past 7 years or so. And, in the mid 2010s, 2015 or so, we saw the application of artificial intelligence to really provide some jet fuel for facial recognition and other biometric technologies or authentication technologies in general. And as we went through the years after that, we saw the technologies getting better and faster and more accurate. And then we saw them being applied in cyberspace. And we saw the deployment of identity technologies for all sorts of different use cases, whether it be to gain access to government benefits or to gain access for a payment system, something like that. And when you see all those types of technologies being deployed, fraudsters immediately pick up on that. And that's an opportunity for them to try to break the system, exploit the flaws, look for inaccuracies or performance fissures where they can take advantage and defeat the system and, steal some of that money or go after the most vulnerable in our societies. And so, what we've all worked really hard on is to develop new technologies to stop the fraudsters and to stay one step ahead of them. And, as we've seen with the stats we've got here, and there's a mountain of other stats, it's getting harder and harder, and the generative AI discussion is going to propel that even further. But that's why providing sort of a layered approach, and I think we'll talk a lot about this, which is like providing a biometric layer and providing other types of layers such as liveness to sort of defeat these fraudsters before they can get very far is just critical as we go forward.
Absolutely. So a lot of alignment. You're seeing attacks of various types at a much higher sophistication level, following on, as you mentioned, Benji, from the previous advances on the security side, powered by artificial intelligence. But at this point, I think what we'd like to do is ask more or less the same question to all of you who are watching. We've got a poll question here. It is, as it says, check all that apply. We recognize that for any of you out there who have seen one, you've probably seen a couple of others at least. Some of them will apply differently depending on the industry that you're in and so on, but we'd definitely like to hear from all of you watching. So please just take a minute, have a quick look over, and let us know what fraud threats are the top concern at your organization. I just want to give everyone a few seconds to consider this, ask the person at the next desk over, so on and so forth. And in a moment, we'll share the results of that poll. Yeah, let's as we do that, let's talk about. In fact, let's. I was going to ask another question, but let's see the results first, and then move on to the next question.
Yeah, I'm curious about the results.
Yeah, me too. Okay, well, I don't want to spend too much time talking about this because this is the kind of thing that we can just talk about all day, I'm sure. But it is clear from the responses here. Thank you very much to those who responded. And synthetic identities have been observed by over 50% of respondents. This is not really that surprising. Account takeovers just behind. Things like chatbot fraud, less so. I suspect that is related, as I said, to the different applicability depending on the industry and use case. But I don't think that we should be surprised to see that number rise over time either. We've got a lot of AI-powered phishing and smishing scams observed as well. So I just want to take a quick second, and I want to ask each of you if anything jumps out at you from these numbers. Blair, what do you think? Is anything really striking here?
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with the pollsters there. Synthetic, I'd absolutely have to put at the top of the list. It's certainly something we've seen a huge uptick in. As the previous slide showed, those lead to account takeovers up 427% already this year. I guess the one that I'm surprised I don't see, we talk about AI-powered phishing and smishing scams. I think the technology is pretty good these days to quash that. We see a lot of social elements there where humans are tricking somebody in a call center. We saw how MGM went down last week by finding a key employee on LinkedIn and phishing them through social engineering. So, but yeah, I would agree with the answers. We don't really see that much chatbot, and we don't work that much in the voice arena, but certainly see a ton of deepfake fraud as well. Benji, what about you?
Yeah, no, I agree. I do find it interesting that the AI generated scams are sort of just below the synthetic identities, right? So like we see, it's interesting, like we know where we see the majority of the fraud taking place, which is where we spend a lot of our efforts. But then we see these other more sophisticated attacks coming up in the poll, which I think is an interesting result, right? We kind of know where we are today and what we're battling and what we're up against, and then we know what's coming next. I think that's an interesting takeaway from this.
Yeah, absolutely. One, you know, and I actually like to follow up, you know, based on your observations of what's happening in the field, and then, you know, and then these answers here. I'd like to kind of rephrase the question and put it back to you as how strong of a handle do you think your customers have on the kinds of attacks that they are experiencing? Is that, what do you think, Blair? Are customers, to what extent are customers strongly aware of the biggest threats against them, and to what extent are they in the process of finding it?
I think that there's still some discovery that needs to be done around synthetic identities. There's been a lot of talk about it, but they're hard to detect, they're hard to quantify. So I think more learning needs to be done around the threat of synthetic identities.
Benji, do you see a disconnect here, or?
I do sometimes, in that when we talk to customers, they know they have a challenge or a problem because they can quantify it in terms of loss from sort of a financial or a balance sheet perspective. But what you often see is customers who are extremely intelligent and well-read, they sometimes struggle to understand the pace of how the technology is evolving. And so to really understand and identify and discover the threats is one thing, but then to understand how they're really unfolding within your tech stack and in cyberspace, that's a whole nother level. And I think that is something that we're all dealing with, because AI is a very popular topic right now. I mean, turn on any channel and everybody's talking about AI. But then, the next couple of questions need to be, what do you mean by that? Like, what flavor of AI? Like, how is it being deployed? How is it being used? How is it being used to train a machine learning model? How is it being deployed to either counter fraud or to instigate a fraud scheme? Those details are pretty critical, because not a lot of the customers really truly understand that. And look, that's not really their job. They've got a mission to do some other business. They're trying to run some other thing in cyberspace. They've got another enterprise. And this is just a particular problem that they need help solving. And so that's when, like, Authentic ID and Rank 1 can come in and say, look, guys, this is what you're dealing with. This is how it's unfolding. This is what you can do to sort of prevent that. So I do think they understand it on some level, but because of the complexity, sometimes it's hard to digest.
Yeah, and with synthetics, it's harder for them to quantify, has been what we've seen, because they don't know if this was a bad debt or really synthetic identity fraud. So getting it classified properly to really understand the grasp of that problem is something people still struggle with in some of the enterprises that we service.
Okay, that's an interesting point. Yeah, I'd like to reorient that question a little bit too. Larry, it is your job, right, at Authentic ID to help these companies deal with these challenges. I mean, they've got the challenges of perception on their end, but then you are the one trying to provide the solutions to these attacks. So what are some of the challenges that your internal teams are trying to keep up with as the fraud landscape evolves and changes?
Oh gosh, what a great question. The challenges are pretty infinite, Chris. So when you're designing ML models in a laboratory in a controlled environment, it's fairly easy to get that right. But that isn't our reality. We're working globally with thousands of different types of handsets, lots of different operating systems, really widely varied environmental conditions with light, dark, rain on sensors, things like that. So as you can imagine, an authentic document that was imaged with a Huawei phone from 2018 versus an authentic document imaged with an iPhone 14 Pro Plus or Pro Max, they're gonna look a little bit different. But our customers count on us to get that decision right, no matter how that document or that face was imaged. So keeping up, we have to use convolutional neural networks, deep neural networks, in order to create all these unanticipated, unseen convolutions and iterations and variants, if you will, to train our models on. So that's the tools that are available to the fraudsters today are far more sophisticated than they were even just a year ago, considerably more sophisticated than they were 4 years ago. So as Benji mentioned earlier, we're in this cat and mouse game. The fraudsters are very, very well equipped, and we have our challenge to stay ahead of the curve. In some cases, our world-renowned team of identity and fraud experts, they're working on technologies that may be 5 years out from actually even being effective. So we focus on those that pose the greatest risk to our customers and our customer use cases. And then lastly, the way that we work is with structured data. So always labeling data is a continuous challenge in getting that right. And it's imperative that you get that right from the get-go. Otherwise, you're training your models on inaccurate data, which leads to erroneous decisions, and nobody wants that. So those are three top of mind challenges that we face today. There are many more.
Very interesting, and a good point, very well taken, about the need to train the AI properly so that you get the outcome you're looking for, rather than just expecting the outcome that you're looking for. And I'd like to turn that around for Benji as well. I mean, rank one computing, often referred to as ROC.ai. It's it's in the name. So can you give us kind of a high level overview of what rank one is doing with AI to combat fraud?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to kind of, it pulls the thread a little bit of what Blair was saying. There's a lot of similarities, but I'll surface two things in particular. Number one, our research team is highly focused and motivated to come up with the best computer vision models and machine learning models for other types of technologies like liveness that we can possibly build. And that is an intense process that requires having PhD level expertise that have been focused on the research and staying up to date on the most recent papers that might be published and the new techniques that are coming out, not only in the United States, but anywhere in the world where that might be published. And then figuring out how to turn that around and improve upon it potentially, or to learn from it and figure out what the new techniques are that are coming out. But also it's obtaining data according to privacy laws and regulations, getting the right amount of data, having it tagged properly, and then running the machine learning models through the paces, and then also turning those models around and putting them into a software mechanism like a software development kit or some other mechanism to deliver that to customers quickly and rapidly so that it can be fielded. So that's an intense process, and that is a process that takes time and energy and investment. But you do have to have the experts that can do that, do it well, and minimize error rates, and then go out and obtain testing certifications, whether it be through iBeta or through NIST, and then take that feedback and learn from it. And that's an intense process. And so the introduction of convolutional neural networks and AI and machine learning to that entire process has really revolutionized a lot of what we do on a daily basis. But that is all within the purview of what our research team does. That'd be number one. Number two that I mentioned, that I referenced, the second one would be something that Blair pulled on, which is super important, which is listening to the customers and learning what they're seeing in the field and trying to understand how we can learn from that as well. Because it is so true. We see these corner cases or the exceptions where the fraudsters have gotten so elaborate and so sophisticated. And that is something that we have to pay attention to, because we do operate in a world of variables. So, Blair mentioned the different phone sets and the conditions. That couldn't be more real and more true. I mean, if we're dealing in a very well-lit space with a poor performing phone versus a well-lit space with a brand new iPhone, you're going to get very different results potentially. And so, and then there's all sorts of other variables that come into it. But I would say, research and development and fielding high quality models is one. And the second one is listening to the voice of the customer and understanding what those problems are, truly understanding those challenges and learning from those challenges. Those are critical. And those are things that we spend a lot of time on a daily basis. I mean, I was just dealing with this morning. We were talking about liveness with a potential customer, and the first things out of our mouths were, what are the transactions? What type of handsets? What are the conditions? What are the regions where this is going to be operating? Because those are critical.
So a real important point is how the sophisticated AI and machine learning systems interact or are implemented, and how people are feeding those systems in their living rooms or in their kitchens with their own personal device. maybe flipping the light on increases their likelihood of success and getting through and getting onboarded to a new account or something like that. But if they don't know, then that creates a real issue. So yeah, so something easily, I think, forgotten as we talk about the more sophisticated parts of the challenge. And so I think as we've been talking about the use of AI and machine learning, I think for most readers of Biometric Update, and probably most of the people listening today, the concept of matching a pattern is kind of one of the easier applications of AI and machine learning to understand. But Blair, I wanted to kind of ask you just generally how the concept of machine learning applies to ID verification.
It's everything, Chris. The older heuristic methods, due to these new generative techniques, the older heuristic methods they're no longer effective. So you have to use deep learning, CNNs, cluster analysis, anomaly detection, computer vision in order to get this right. So everything from the get-go. We use AI just to capture the image. In order for us to do our forensic analysis of an identity document, we need a good quality image. We need to have all four corners. We need to make sure the face is present on the document. So we need to use face detectors. We use barcode detectors. We make sure that we're squeezing the maximum amount of resolution out of every device so that we can get much more detail to be able to really do this forensic analysis. You can see just how sophisticated some of these IDs, and these are available out on the dark web. There are millions of sites where you don't even have to go to the dark web, and you can also, obtain very realistic counterfeit IDs. So we use those for data extraction. We use it for analysis, for fraud analysis. We fuse our algorithms using AI. We classify documents as authentic or fraudulent using the AI. We make sure that the headshots on the documents using AI fit the ICAO standard that we expect to see on an identity document. We make sure that the signatures that are present on the document aren't computer generated. We use liveness to make sure that the face that we're matching to the headshot on the ID, and that's all AI-based technology, that's a real person that's alive and being imaged in real time and not some facsimile of or a computer replay of. So at virtually every step that you see here along the way, AI is being used. We're using AI to make sure that, again, the headshot's there, all four corners are there, that we've got a good, nice, full frontal picture of that person's face. We use the AI to detect repeat fraudsters with our Fraud Shield capability. And we use it again for reauthentication. So the next time that we see you, Chris, after we've enrolled you, you simply need to show your face. And we use advanced liveness technologies like those offered by ROC.ai to make sure that we're not being spoofed there.
So a lot of different things.
A lot of different things and a lot of different technologies. It's the DNNs, the CNNs, cluster analysis, anomaly detection. Those are just a few of the tools that our scientists, and as Benji mentioned, these are generally PhDs that are reading all the latest and greatest white papers from every university around the globe. They're world renowned and stay as much as we can ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I'd just like to pick up on what Blair mentioned there. That's super important. The ICAO standard, having those quality checks, in addition to all the other types of sophisticated technology we see on this slide, but just from a face recognition perspective, having an algorithm that's highly NIST ranked is a requirement right out of the gate, but then also making sure that those quality parameters are being tick boxed or checked when you're doing an enrollment or a verification or an ID. It just helps because it makes sure that there's certain features of the face that are prominently displayed, and there's no question that they're maybe missing from the photo. And then layering on this layering effect is really important. Layering on liveness on top of that. plus all the other things that you might throw on it. Often reminds me of the old adage around physical security, because there's rings, right? It's a similar, somewhat of a parallel thought process. It's like you layering on things, technologies to go against these fraud attempts. And it's just critical that you have all those things piled up.
Absolutely. I'd like to take an opportunity to do some explaining of my own, but this is a rare opportunity where I can feel like I can explain something that some of the people watching may not be aware of, which is ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization. So these are the people who set the standard. That means that, which is why you are told if you go to take your passport photo, please stop smiling, right? Don't smile. The reason is because that helps the algorithm make an accurate assessment. Is your whole head in the frame, etc. These requirements for the photo, what the photo looks like and how the person is presented, help the algorithm. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about those ICAO standards. So that the reason that those are the standard for the passport is because this allows the algorithms to do their work. So so we're all familiar with it, even if we didn't know that that's what it's called, kind of thing. So on that note, I'd like to bring up our next polling question. We'd like to hear now, having heard what kinds of fraud everyone is dealing with, we'd like to know what methods your business is currently using to fight fraud at your organization. Again, it's a situation where if you've seen one, you're probably, if you're using one, you're probably using several. So please do check all that apply. And yeah, we'll give everyone a minute or two to complete this, and then we'll get an idea of what everyone's using and maybe things that they might consider using if they aren't so far. Yeah, any thoughts on any expectations or predictions for what we're going to see here from either of you gentlemen?
The last one of these I did, Chris, and we don't have this question up here. There was a really large percentage of the population of our viewing audience that is still doing a lot of this stuff with humans. So interested in seeing what percentage of people are still doing this with humans, because I can promise you, Benji and I are both experts at this. Humans can't detect these anomalies. We can't detect with our eyes these generative techniques that are being deployed. But let's see, biometric authentication, behavioral analysis, I think, and step-up authentication are going to be number 1, 2, and 3 is my prediction.
That sounds plausible. Another point I'd just like to raise, as you building on what you said, Blair, about the inability of people to detect sophisticated fraud. I mean, if it's sophisticated, that's sort of your tell, I think, from an outsider's perspective, from the non-expert's perspective, let's say. But beyond that, something else I think businesses need to keep in mind is if you're doing manual verification, if you're having people look at other people's IDs, you get into a whole quagmire of potential problems with privacy, with ethics, and perhaps chief among all, with regulators. So
I'll add one more thing that's pretty important: bias.
Bias,
It gets introduced into the equation. People just inherently have bias. So when machines execute a decision, they don't have bias. People do. So you're introducing that into the equation as well, which is super scary. I mean, we deal with governmental entities, and that's in big enterprise banks, and it's certainly a no-no for any bias to be introduced into the equation for any of those entities.
Absolutely. I actually have a question here that I'm specifically planning to ask Benji in just a minute about bias. So let's come back to that in just a moment. Yeah, can we have a look at those results, please? Thank you. Yeah, you nailed biometric authentication, Blair. Behavioral analysis, a little bit under ID verification. So
good.
The IDs that people are looking at are still getting a look in the majority of cases. Real-time monitoring over 50%. And step-up authentication a little bit below 50%. So yeah, let's try and keep moving here. But I would like to hear just briefly if you have any immediate thoughts on that, Benji or Blair.
Go first, Benji.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to see that biometric authentication is high on the list, right? Because
Yeah.
we've been wanting this widespread acceptance and adoption for a long time, and I think everybody knows the narrative. I think the pandemic really helped propel that. But I don't believe we're going to go back. And I do think that just to echo what's already been said about the humans in the loop all the time, making all the decisions is challenging, because computer assisted decision making is where we think this is going and where it is going, and it's definitely more efficient and more effective. So that's great.
I concur. I'd love to see the adoption. I think in years past, there's been this concern about deploying biometric authentication. It's going away. People are realizing that it's far more effective. It's a better user experience, and they're adopting like crazy. And like you, I'm super glad to see that people are now using ID verification technology instead of humans. That's a big uptick from the last poll webinar that I did just a month and a half ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and to the earlier points about the rapid change in the market and in the landscape, I just want to briefly ask each of you if you're surprised about 28%, 8 out of 29. All regular small sample size caveats notwithstanding and everything. Does that surprise you? Is that a legacy technique that has no business being used in the context of sophisticated AI driven fraud? Or is there still a place where you can imagine this being an effective way of screening out fraud? What do you think, Blair?
Personally, I think it's the worst way in the world to validate identity. And I'm not the first one to say this. NIST published guidance in 2016 warning that no enterprise in the US should be using knowledge-based authentication. That's been a number of years. That's 7 years ago. So why people are still deploying that legacy technology is pretty confusing to me. Given all the data breaches, getting the answers to these KBA questions and with social engineering, it's pretty rudimentary, pretty simple stuff. So get rid of that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, and further, it's cumbersome, right? I mean, the solutions that are being fielded right now are tightly integrated with a frictionless workflow that make things a lot easier. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I saw banking, my banking app had the option to use face recognition just to log in and not have to type in a bunch of passwords and try to prove who I am, that not only does it give me a level of confidence and security, but also it's this notion of ease and simplicity that makes it a lot quicker to access the data and get through the transaction that you're trying to execute. And I totally agree. I mean, I think that we're going to continue to see more of these more seamless biometric technologies deployed.
Seems like the trend for sure. Another thing that occurs to me on the knowledge-based authentication front is that we had a story at Biometric Update fairly recently. I can't remember who the researcher was, but they assessed the accuracy of people, legitimate users and fraudulent actors, answering knowledge-based authentication questions. And they found that fraudsters who are looking at probably some sort of, at a screen that of information called from a data breach are better at answering questions about the legitimate user's life than the legitimate user is.
It's actually a really strong indicator of fraud. 100% score on a knowledge-based MFA is a very strong indicator of fraud. Real people can't answer the obscure questions these days, and that creates this terrible friction. As Benji mentioned, nobody wants that. I want to be able to get through this authentication process as simply as opening up my iPhone. I don't want to answer 5 questions and then get 2 of the 5 wrong and fail, which I do often.
And have to call the helpline and try to, yeah.
I don't know what the last amount of the last transaction was. I'm sorry. I tell the bank, and then we repeat. But that does at the same time, as we're steering people towards these, the benefits of these new technologies and biometrics in particular, that raises the question of what the drawbacks or potential drawbacks of those technologies might be. And one that has been in the news a fair bit over the last several years is the potential for bias, and particularly something that we've seen in relation to face biometrics technology. And some of that has to do with studies that are more than a few years old, let's say, and at least in one prominent case, did not actually assess face matching so much as face assessment, but nonetheless raising very important points that have since been explored by NIST and other bodies. So Benji, I want to ask you how you go about preventing bias from creeping into a machine learning algorithm. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. No, and it's a critical topic. It's really important. And as more of these face recognition technologies proliferate, we want to make sure that we can trust them and that they're going to perform the way that the developers claim that they will. And the best way to do that is it's two things primarily. Number one, I would say making sure that you get third-party validation, whether that be through NIST or another well-known entity. NIST is the best-known entity out there that could test for performance and accuracy, but also being able to detect how poorly an algorithm or how well an algorithm will work on certain populations or certain subsets of the population. And then, the other thing is making sure that you train your models on diverse data sets. And this has been a critical element of how face recognition has been developed over the past, we'll call it 3 to 5 years, but it's probably been longer than that for the top tier performers, because we've known for over a decade in the research literature that different shades of human skin perform differently depending on which algorithm you throw at it, and depending on how well or how poorly a data set has been developed and the algorithm's been trained on that data set. So those are two critical things. And the good news is, and you referenced the 2019 NIST study that the media often seizes upon. And the thing that I would urge everyone to understand is that, we are dealing with biometric technologies that at their roots are never 100% perfect. We know that. But what we do know is that we're so close to perfect now that the error rates are hard for the human eye to even detect. We're talking massive amounts of data, massive advancements in artificial intelligence and machine learning that have driven the error rates down dramatically. And all of that has been documented by third-party entities such as NIST. And so we have mountains of data that show that we've made great strides. And that's something to be proud of, because we can go back to 2010s, 2005, and we know that face recognition back then didn't work that well. It would work 50% of the time. And today we've got error rates that are below 1% and sometimes half of a percentage point. And we're talking about very large data sets, millions and millions and millions of faces. And so it's just an exciting time to be in the field to watch some of these problems get solved, and nobody's stopping. They're continuing to test. They're continuing to get better. They're continuing to drive these error rates closer to zero every single day.
Absolutely. And the follow-up test from NIST clearly showed general gains throughout the industry, but I think it's probably a good opportunity at this point to mention what Patrick Grother, who is the lead on that study for NIST, often says, has told me and has told anyone who would listen at a certain point, know your algorithm, right?
Absolutely.
There's
100%.
There's no useful average, right? It's not.
That's right. And the last thing I'll throw in, I forgot to mention this, you alluded to it, Chris. I'm really happy to see what NIST has done by splitting the facial recognition vendor test into sort of one-to-one and one-to-many test versus the face analytics. And having those two separate tests, hopefully that will go a lot further in helping people to understand the difference and not confuse the two. Because I think what we've seen in the media and a lot of folks who have been turned on to this topic they sometimes confuse the two, and they're very different types of technologies. Being able to detect and identify features of a face is very different than being able to identify a face and do a one-to-one or one-to-many. They're related, but they're not the same. And I think that confusion has caused a lot of challenges in a lot of the debates that we have in our community and outside our community, especially when it comes to lawmakers and policymakers. And so it is already a complex topic, and just bringing more clarity can only be good for all of us.
And and in so saying, you kind of raised the some of the other complexities that go into assessing, what makes an effective algorithm or what makes an effective system. So can you maybe speak to, beyond bias, other challenges? And then I want to ask Blair the same question as well.
Yeah, I think, as we see a developing landscape around new techniques to train the algorithms, larger data sets, being able to work across larger and larger expanding data sets, but still do it in a quick manner. That's something we're always working on, because as everybody knows, whenever you develop an algorithm or a new machine learning model, you've got to introduce new technologies to perform better and more accurately. But that sometimes those added features can slow down the speed. And so being able to develop and deploy a technology that's both highly accurate, but also highly performing, but also still shrinks the footprint of the algorithm or the SDK that gets implemented within a technology stack, such as authentic IDs, is important, because we don't want to, you don't have infinite amount of space to keep deploying technology, and you don't have all the time in the world. You want to be able to do this as quickly as possible, hundreds of milliseconds or less, and be able to deliver that same level of accuracy. And so being able to upgrade and continue to improve upon the feature sets that you might have implemented in previous versions is critically important. The other thing I'll say it's really important and is to be able to deploy an algorithm into a testing scenario, whether it be with NIST or DHS-S&T, which is the other well-known one for the aviation sector and border crossings, but also being able to say with confidence that that same algorithm that was tested is the same one that's in your product is critical. And that's huge, because sometimes you'll have sort of engineering algorithms or sort of cutting edge algorithms that may not be ready for prime time, and being able to match those up and be transparent for the public, it just builds more trust. And I think that we've come a long way in the biometrics industry, and being able to continue to build on that is critically important.
That sounds like a challenge for Blair and for others using these algorithms to build solutions, right? So Blair, what do you see in terms of other challenges in applying the cutting edge technology to stop fraud?
Yeah, it's all about data, and having good quality data, well-distributed data, well-labeled data is critical and imperative in order for us to perform well. But today, that's a very tedious process. It's structured data. So we have people that are going through and manually labeling this. So I'm excited about things like Meta's latest project called Segment Anything. They threw 11 billion images at it, and it basically understands everything that's in an image, all without anybody having to label. So moving to an unstructured data, to be able to leverage unstructured data, and to be able to have this paradigm where unlabeled data sets can be leveraged to speed up fraud detection and make us better, is something I'm looking forward to. We got to get rid of the people out of this, and would love to be able to leverage unstructured data and do as good a job. Interesting.
Automating the right things comes up again. Yeah, and I actually want to, first of all, acknowledge the people asking questions. I see that we've got a few questions submitted already. We're going to get to those in just a minute or two, or a couple of minutes. Before we do, I want to just quickly ask Benji to touch on AI regulation. And can you give us some idea of how that's going to shape the industry over the next few years?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think it's something that that we're going to watch closely with bated breath, and see what type of federal legislation, if any, can be pushed out. I do know what we have seen, policy and laws always lag behind technology. We know that. And so it's always a challenge. And so what we need to do as a technology industry is make sure that we're sensitive and responsive to the concerns that are coming out of lawmakers and other stakeholders in the community, and that we address them as best we can. But there are a number of executive orders coming out of this administration. There are a number of policy directives coming out of at least the large scale departments and agencies across the US federal government. DHS just released a couple of directives last week, one on face recognition and one on artificial intelligence. I would encourage all the watchers and viewers here to go check that out. I think it's pretty good because it adds a lot of clarity to who does what to whom inside of big government and how they operate and how they make their decisions, which transparency is always good in government, right? The more transparent, the better we can understand how decisions were made and how that might affect citizens is very important. But, you know, similar to the privacy discussions we've had for the past 10 years or longer, it's hard. It's really hard, and it's hard to get consensus, especially at the federal level to pass laws. So I think that there will still be an interest to pass legislation at the federal level. But what I do believe will continue to happen is we'll see more activity at the state level where it's a little bit easier to get things done. Sometimes that makes it hard for commercial entities to operate, but we understand the importance around the safeguards and providing policy and laws and regulations to protect people in society. So it's critically important. It's an ongoing discussion and debate. We're going to see a lot more of it over the next couple of years, especially when it comes to AI.
Right. Watch this space.
Absolutely.
All right. I'd like to just skip right to a few questions from the audience at this point before coming back to each of you for some final thoughts. So thanks again to everyone, first of all, for attending and listening, and secondly, for submitting some interesting questions. The first one from an anonymous attendee: how are you handling high-quality fake printed IDs using real compromised identities, considering fake ID is identical to a real government-issued printed ID? So we have a real identity being used to commit fraud. How do you handle this, Blair?
So we're able to detect the mistakes, and they all make mistakes in these fraudulent identities. They look perfect to the human eye. Yeah, if I were to put a set of eyes on them, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between an authentic document and something that was produced by a high-quality counterfeiter. Nevertheless, they always make mistakes. I have yet to see the perfect ID. You can buy the perfect template, but getting it printed out with the 8 layers that are composed of a real government issued ID and having all those security features and the patterns be at the right layer inside that document, it's exceedingly difficult. They're getting better and better and better. We're just continue to try to stay one step ahead. But there are all kinds of things in IDs. I just got a new Florida ID, and if you look at this on the eye, there are features that are embossed and look to be 3D. There are misprints within the document that are intentional. There's white ink drops spilled across the word Florida in that document that you can't see with the human eye, but our computer vision is able to pick up those attributes and determine whether that was really an authentic document or something that was created by a counterfeiter that's close, but not perfect.
Mm-hmm. So there seems analogous actually to the generative AI problem, where the human eye may perceive this as indistinguishable from the real thing, but there is maybe a tell that we can't see, people are not capable of seeing, but that the system can detect.
Yeah, and it's not just the visual clues either. We use a combination of tools. So we use behavioral analysis, the concept of when a person's imaging the real ID and imaging the real face, they act in a very specific manner and pattern. So we use sensor data from the device, and we're able to detect anomalous behavior in that regard. The data that's on these documents, it's very hard to get that right. Most people don't know. So for example, if you look at your driver's license, there's an obscure number underneath your headshot. that's called a DD number, and it ranges anywhere from 12 to about 27 different characters, depending on the state of issuance. Most people think that's just a random set of numbers. It's not. There's an algorithm behind that. So we run those algorithms to run sanity checks on all of the data that's on the document as well. There's a number of different ways that we detect these very sophisticated fraudsters, and it's not just using visual techniques.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. And another question for you, Blair, coming from Matthias Vermeulen. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. This enrollment process is fairly standard business by now. How is Authentic ID different from its competitors? So,
yeah, so we're 100% automated. We're one of the very few in the world that are automated. Most people's technology isn't good enough to stop them from looking stupid. So for example, you could post Bozo's face over the headshot of most other vendors in this space, and they're simply looking to validate that the patterns they expect to see on the document are there, that the security features that they expect to see are there. But they're a headshot replacement, something that simple, that's so obvious to the human eye, their technology can't detect. So they have to put humans in the loop on this. Anytime you put humans in the loop, it's going to add some latency, right? And today people want instant gratitude. Whether it's 30 seconds of latency or 3 minutes worth of latency, it doesn't matter. In a lot of cases, you're going to have abandonment. B, people can't detect these sophisticated documents. C, it adds bias to the equation. So being a fully automated solution eliminates bias, improves your conversion rate, and absolutely helps your fraud detection rates over the other players in the industry that are really kind of check the box players for KYC. Let me get an image of the document, let me extract the data, let me extract the face for further matching. But in terms of real fraud detection, that's where we excel. That's why we're chosen by the top banks. That's why we've been chosen by the US government. That's why virtually every telecommunications company in North America uses Authentic ID. They've done bake-offs, they've looked at the results, and that's what's different.
very good. Very good. Thank you. And moving right along, I want to ask Benji to weigh in first on this one. Should you do deepfake detection as a separate check besides biometric and injection attack checks?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. The challenge around generative AI face images is a tough one that I think all of us are still working through. I think over time there will be a combined check that will eventually happen, but in time what you'll have to do is do this layered approach like we've been talking about, where there's a face recognition check that's done. And again, these are in hundreds of milliseconds or less, right? So it's not perceptible to the user necessarily, but you're going to do the face check, you're going to do a liveness check, and I think you're going to do an injection attack check alongside of that. But I will say that from what I'm hearing from our researchers, the way that we think about liveness and the way that we look at generative AI images, I think a lot of that will begin to combine and creep together, because there are tells and in the face images, whether it be like you're stitching a face onto somebody else's face, or it's like a puppeteer, we can tell that there's anomalies, and we can see that there's fakeness in those images. I think it's a matter of getting the right data, training the data, and integrating those new feature sets. So my response there would be, I think that initially it'll be an independent check, but over time it'll get collapsed into what we call a liveness check over time.
That's how you see things evolving as well, Blair?
I agree, 100%.
Yeah, okay.
It's almost perceived as one process now because, as Benji mentioned, it happens in hundreds of milliseconds, but today they are two distinct processes.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I want to race through as many of these questions as we can. We've got a few more really good questions here, although we are pretty much up to our hour. So if you'll bear with us, we'll touch on a few more. This one should be fairly straightforward. Do you get false positives on DMV issued IDs when they change formats, get new machines, etc.?
We see tons of challenges. Yeah. So, in a lot of states, you've got centralized production of IDs. So the consistency of those documents, it's consistent. We don't see a lot of variance. You take a state like Florida, And every little DMV office is printing that document right then and there and handing it to you over the counter. And they all use, a variant of a Zebra printer, but those things they need maintenance and they slip, and there's slight variances from one DMV to another. And we need to be able to understand all those variances. They're all authentic documents. We can't be rejecting these just because they vary slightly based on where they were issued. So it's a huge challenge that we continue to have to keep up with.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, it's good practice, right? I mean, when you have a new document issued, I mean, we just went through this with my children. When they got a new passport, it's a little different because they were younger and they grew up. You re-enroll the image. And so I think that's a pretty good practice. And sometimes a lot of these documents have validity for 5 years or 10 years. And so it's really critical that when you do have that extra touch point, you go ahead and get a re-enrolled image. It updates everything. And to Blair's point, you've got new equipment, you've got new resolution on cameras or other types of imaging technology. It's just better to get that upgraded image.
Arizona lets you keep your ID until you were 60 at one point in time. You imagine doing matching on that?
Wow.
The importance of policy in battling fraud.
Best practices, sure.
Absolutely. We've got a few more really good questions here, but I don't think we're going to be able to get to them all. So I actually like to take this opportunity to invite everyone. If you have a question that doesn't get answered, it's authenticid.co. Reach out to Authentic ID. It's roc.ai. Reach out to Rank One Computing. You have more questions, they have more answers. For now, there's just one more question I'd like to ask before wrapping up. And that's how do you deal with compromised, stolen real documents? And related, do you work together with authorities to report these cases? And do you have document-only flows?
We do have document-only flows. They're typically only used in a brick and mortar location where the consumer is standing right in front of the store employee. In a remote situation, it's rarely document-only flow, but it's actually a relatively simple problem to solve. If I steal Benji's ID or he leaves it at the bar, I can't use it because I'm not Benji from a biometric standpoint. So, those are really rendered completely useless to somebody other than the person it was issued to in our world.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Then at this point, I'd like to just go back to each of you for a 30-second, 45-second tops final thoughts around the recommendations and best practices for our remaining listeners on mitigating and staying ahead of these AI threats. Blair?
Implement technology, folks. Get rid of people out of the equation. Give your customers a better friction-free experience that's smooth and easy. If you start thinking about biometric authentication, it solves not only third-party fraud, but first-party fraud as well. So first-party fraud is a pretty considerable amount of fraud. And when you've got this audit trail that shows that Chris really performed this transaction with this date and timestamp, that problem goes away. So implement technology, get rid of humans, make your customers happy.
Sounds good. Benji?
Go with the experts. Go with those who are curious, who want to stay ahead of the pack. Go with those technology providers who score highly in the NIST trials. They consistently stay at the top. They work with iBeta. They work with DHS S&T. Go with those providers of technology. They will always typically be at the forefront of the pack. And they're also the same ones that are typically curious and staying in these types of conversations and trying to stay close to the pulse of the customers and the fraud use cases and where the policy and the laws are going. So go with the curious, go with the experts.
Great advice. I like that. I'm stealing it.
Go ahead, Blair.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank both Blair and Benji. Thank you guys very much for sharing your insight today. I'd also like to share everyone or to thank everyone who shared their time with us today and their questions. It's been another interesting conversation, and I look forward to our next conversations as well. So until then, everyone have enjoyable days, and make sure you go with the experts and get rid of those people in the loop.
The curious ones, yeah.
Curious ones, that's right.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.